Hi, thanks for tuning in today to Front Porch Conversations here at the Advent Christian Village. We are on the porch at the Copeland Community Center this morning, and it's a bright, beautiful day, and I understand I wasn't up quite early enough to see it, but there was a beautiful moon early this morning. So now I'd like to introduce you to our guest, David Vignali.
Hey,
did I get
perfect.
it good?
You got
We've
it
been
right.
practicing, right?
Right.
David, you live here at the village and in Dowling House, is that
In
correct?
Dowling House, yes.
And tell our viewers about your last name now that I've almost gotten it right.
Well, what I think is Vignali means the vineyard, and I Vignali would be the keepers of the vineyards. I was with my cousin in Italy, and we went up to the cemetery to see my great-grandparents' grave. And there were lots of Vignalis buried there. And I said, well, who are these people? And she said, well, we're not from here. We're not related to them.
Oh.
So I need to go back over there and spend about a week in the church records and find out. Although I won't get. My grandfather told about building that church. It's up on top of the mountain, and they had a line of men, and they passed all the stones from one to the other up the mountain to build a church up there.
And what part of Italy is that?
North Central, in Emilia-Romagna, if you know Italy.
I know little Paquito.
Oh,
I guess I'm mixing up my languages here. David, tell us about your where you were born and where you grew up.
Well, I was born in northern Wisconsin at Merrill, which is north of Wausau, which you may know where that is. And I was the first of the children to be born in the hospital in that family. Well, I'm the oldest of 11, and there are still 8 of us left, so it's a pretty... One of the first questions they asked me in Italy was, do the Vignalis in America live as long as the ones that live here in Italy do? So we see.
And I remember when you moved in, you had a sister who came with you, I think.
I have 4 sisters.
You have.
And I had 5 brothers, but the 3 of them are dead now. So there are 8 of us left.
And did you grow up in Wisconsin?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
And what are some of your favorite memories of childhood?
Favorite memories of childhood? Well, I was told that I ran away when I was about 4 years old with no clothes on, and they went down the road and got me back.
I hope that wasn't in winter.
No, it was in the summer, I think. I remember my earliest memory is the copper boiler sitting on the stove with the milk in it making cheese. And I found, it occurred to me later, that was the milk strike. And my father wouldn't dump his milk, so we made cheese out of it and used the milk can covers to form the cheeses in. Another memory is when I was in first grade coming home, and they were putting the poles in to have electricity there because we lived about 3 miles from the Wisconsin River, and they had put the 2 dams in, WPA, I think, one at Grandfather Falls and one at Grandmother Falls, and so we had electricity from the mid-30s. Yeah.
And was that a fairly rural area?
Oh, that was a rural area, yes. We had a farm. You could buy in those days, if you paid the taxes on land that had been taxed and the taxes weren't paid, you could get it. Mm-hmm. So he got the land that way by paying the taxes on this land.
And what was your primary part of farming? Did you do general purpose farming or?
Well, we had a dairy farm. The milk went to a condensery. It didn't go to a cheese factory. It went to a condensery, but that was primarily, and that farm now belongs to the Sportsman's Club. And they have built a clubhouse there, and we were able to have our family reunion there a couple of years ago on the farm that most of us grew up on.
So it was like a homecoming.
Yes, it
really
was, yeah.
You attended school in that area? And
A one-room school about half a mile away, and we walked to that school. I remember just once when it was snowing heavily, my father came with the horses and the sleigh and took us home, but just other than that, we walked.
And were all of your siblings close in age?
Oh dear, about 2 years apart mostly.
I was thinking you might have been the whole population of the school. Were there
no. No.
When you said one-room schoolhouse.
Yeah, well, let's see. I went there, and my three brothers went there, and one of my sisters, I think. But then we moved to southern Wisconsin because my father had been brought up in Illinois and was used to raising corn, and you don't raise much corn in northern Wisconsin.
I'm sure not.
Except for silage, and so he was carrying mail and saw the ad in the Madison newspaper for a farm about 45 miles north of Madison, and we bought that farm and moved to southern Wisconsin.
And did you live there until you left home?
Yes.
And talk to us about your education, if you would.
Well, I have a bachelor's degree from what was then Whitewater State College, although it had started out as a teacher's training institution and is now a part of the university system, the University of Wisconsin at Whitewater. But when I was there, it was a state college in the late 40s and early 50s. And I have a master's degree from the University of Wisconsin in Spanish, so that's my education.
And after college, what did you do?
I taught. I was a teacher for 30-some years. When I was in college during the Korean War, and the draft was in effect then, and I figured, well, as soon as we graduate, I'll be drafted. I had a student deferment, but I figured as soon as I'm done with college, I'll be drafted. So I didn't look for a job, and they finally got around to giving us the physical about October of that year. And as soon as they checked my eyes and found that I had 2,400 in one eye and 2,300 in the other eye, they said, "Oh, you're 4F, we don't want you." And so I got a teaching job second semester. A man who had twins, and they already had triplets, and he decided he would make more money selling insurance, so I got his job second semester in Medford, which is west of Merrill. And then the next year I got to Wautoma, which is west of Oshkosh, B'gosh.
Yes, they make overalls there.
They make overalls, among other things, and I was there 32 years in the same school system. So.
And what did you teach during that time?
Well, I taught Spanish and I taught social studies, mostly history, but some economics, some sociology, but mostly history. Mm-hmm.
What was your favorite part about teaching?
Oh my, the kids, I guess. I've been invited to some of the to many of the reunions while I was teaching, and some of the reunions afterwards. So I guess that was my favorite part, was the kids.
Over that period of time, you touched a lot of lives, I'm sure.
Oh yes, a lot of lives. In fact, one of the boys turned out to be the city engineer at Merrill, where I grew up. So,
I understand that you became involved in mission work. Would you tell us about that?
Well, my first My first contact was with teen missions because Millie Griswold's husband was our National Youth Director. Clinton Tabor and I were on the National Council of Youth Ministries together, and we hired him, Roland Griswold, as our first National Youth Director. He knew the director of teen missions, and so we had a team that went to India and built a church in Chennai, which is at that time was called Madras, and now called Chennai. So that was my first contact with missions.
And did you go on that first trip to
I
India?
went on that first trip, yeah. At that time, teen missions would allow you to have what was a denominational team, and we did. I don't think they do that anymore. They have mostly their own teams. But our team was all from the Advent Christian Church, except 2 or 3 of the students. And then later on, I discovered that the mission in Philippines needed a business manager. So when I retired from teaching, I went to the Philippines for 13 years and was business manager for the mission.
And I bet you met some people there that live here now.
Yes, I met Laura Putnam. I didn't know her then, but Sharon Turjung's husband was a pilot for Wycliffe. And, Laura was already here at the village when I was in the Philippines. She was not there any longer, but I knew about her. My colleagues were Margaret Helms and David Dean the Younger and Frank Jewett and his wife and children, yeah.
And did you grow up in the Advent Christian denomination?
I grew up as a Baptist, and the only time I've been to camp as a camper was a Baptist camp when I was in high school, and that's where I found the Lord, of course. But then when we moved to Baraboo, there was an Advent Christian church there, and that was my mother's church. She said one day, well, we've got to go to the Advent Christian church and see what that's like. We'd been going to a Baptist church because that's where I grew up. And she said, oh, I'm home. We're going to the Advent Christian church. So from high school on, I've been an Advent Christian. Mm-hmm.
And I understand you were talking as I walked in this morning about Lake Winnipesaukee. Would you share with our viewers about?
Well, when I was back from the Philippines, I used to travel around. The mission would always lease a car for me. And mostly I traveled in the Midwest and the West Coast. But that one fall, I was in New England. And at Alton Bay, there's a mission cottage, so that was my headquarters for the time I was in New England. And the story I was telling you when you came in was about the time that I was at Alton Bay and didn't have a church to go to on Wednesday night, so I went to their midweek service, and the little white-haired missionary lady said, and how many people are there in your village in the Philippines? And since we lived in Cagayan de Oro, where the Bible school was, I said, about 500,000 as far as I know. And I think it kind of blew her mind.
And I think we were talking then about the fact that everybody doesn't think of a missionary or mission work being done in the same way.
Right, because we were in the cities, which is where the people were, but I think her concept of missions was somebody trotting through the jungle with a pith helmet going to where the villages were. Now, it's true that in the Philippines, some of those villages were inaccessible. Well, you could walk in, but it would take a day or more. And Wycliffe would fly planes into those villages. That's what Sharon Turjung's husband did with JARS, was the missionary aviation service, yeah.
And when you were, for the 13 years you were in the Philippines, did you travel a lot around the Philippines?
Oh, yes. I probably knew more of the Philippines than some of the Filipinos did. My favorite church was one in the western part of Visayas at an island. Oh dear, what is the Cebuano word for pregnant? Because the mountain looked like a pregnant lady lying there. And they served you crab for breakfast, and I liked that very much.
That seems like a good thing.
Yeah, that was a good. It was a little fishing village, yeah. And then, I'll tell you another story about the Philippines. We were having a kind of a convention at the college, and we were out at the beach down Mindanao for a ways, and there were a lot of starfish laying on the beach. And so I said, "What is the word for in Cebuano for a starfish?" And they said, "Starfish." I said, no, there were starfish here before the Americans came. There has to be a Cebuano word. Well, they thought for a while. This was the students from the college, and they said, "Estrella del Mar." Well, that's Spanish, and that means the star of the sea. And I said, well, there were starfish here before the Spaniards came, so there's got to be a word in Cebuano for starfish. But for now, I'll accept that. Well, then we were at a little fishing village near Surigao, which is on the other side of Mindanao. I said, they will know what the word for a starfish is. So I said, what do you call a starfish? And they said, lima lima, which means 5. And when you double a word in Cebuano, it changes the meaning. Well, a starfish has 5 arms, and so that's what they called a starfish, was a lima lima, 5.
Well, it took you a while to get back to the origin of the word, but you were successful.
Yeah, I was persistent, like the gnats in the Philippines are. They drive me crazy, these gnats, but anyway.
Well, to me, that's just one of the nuances of what missionaries have had to do, helping people to understand the Bible and helping them to understand their dialects well enough to even make a written Bible for them.
Yeah.
And that work is phenomenal to me.
Well, I think Wycliffe figures they are finished in the Philippines. They've done practically all the dialects. When they translated, they would translate the New Testament, and then if the people didn't know how, they would teach them to read and write so they could read the translation of the... So they did quite a bit of literacy work that way with that. But I think they are pretty well finished. They wanted to close the base on Mindanao, but of course the people who had been there a long time didn't want to close the base there, but they had their base, one in Mindanao and one in Luzon, where Pete's wife is from, up in the up on the big island up north.
This is about the 65th conversation we've had for TV2.
Oh my goodness.
And it's been amazing how many of people who've been through these interviews or conversations have had some relationship with the Philippines.
Yes, well, you have quite a few people from Wycliffe here on the in the village. I know there was a couple that we used to visit there in Mindanao that were living here, but I think they're probably both dead now, probably. And Sharon Turgeon was in the Philippines, and
Dodie Jones grew up there.
Dodie, yes, and Bruce Arnold's wife is Filipina,
and Tom, who is doing our filming today.
Yes, his wife was.
And the Navy helped him get there.
Well, I was traveling on the boat one night from Cagayan up to the island of Cebu, And I met a man on the boat who was fixing to get married. And he had picked out a Filipina as his bride and had come over to marry her and find her. So that was...
Well, as a Southerner, I would probably say he was from the South if he was fixing to.
Yeah, well, probably, yeah. There used to be a column in the Cebu paper of men, usually Europeans, advertising for wives. And one of the Filipina girls that I knew said one time, well, I ought to answer one of those ads. And I said to her, why do you suppose if they're as wonderful as they say in the ad, they didn't find a wife in Europe or wherever they're from? Oh, she said, I had never thought of that. So I think she married to a Filipino too, instead of a European.
I know that as an Advent Christian, you probably knew about the village.
Oh, yes.
But what prompted your thoughts of moving here? Where were you living at the time?
I was living in Central Florida, in Brooksville, and I have two sisters, one who lives in Massarik Town, which is south of Brooksville, and one who lives right in Brooksville. And they said, well, and I knew I was going to end up here eventually, so they said, well, it's time for you to move to the village now. So I came here.
And what are the things that you've enjoyed about the village?
Oh, well, the people here, the way the Lord has taken care of us in this pandemic that we've had. I volunteer usually at the archives, helping out there as a docent and showing the movie on Saturday afternoons. There was a notice in the FNN that said they were going to end the movie because they couldn't find anybody to run it anymore. And I thought, well, I can do that, and it's a shame that people that want to see a movie aren't going to have a chance unless somebody shows them. So I run the movies on Saturday afternoon.
The movie matinee.
The movie matinee, right. Recently we've had the Narnia series that Disney made, but Disney doesn't follow the book very well. Disney does his own thing pretty much.
You know, I always prefer reading the book.
Yes.
It's not of any movie. Some are close, but...
Yeah, some are close, but because I've read most of the Narnia books, and the movies don't follow very closely.
Are you an avid reader?
Oh, yes.
What do you like to read?
I told Sal, who works at the desk at Dowling House, I said, between reading the books and doing the jigsaw puzzles, I haven't been bored by all the restrictions we have here at the village, so I'm pretty close.
And what advice would you give a young person today? I know you had many years of giving advice. Was there something different you would say today? Or to a person who is young now?
I don't know what advice I would give them today. Just learn to accept life, I guess, and take it as it comes and live with it.
Well, I think a lot of us have had a kind of a little bit of a reawakening.
Oh, yes.
Whatever we're planning to do. Whatever we thought we were going to do the 1st of January is not how this
is.
year
Isn't that what happens? Well, what I usually tell Dr. Saunders, who also works at the desk, is that I will start remembering my masks when we don't need them anymore. But I do remember to take it with me. But as you say, I used to travel quite a bit summers, and now, of course, you don't travel much around, yeah.
And as you do, it's a very different experience
Well,
now.
yes, yeah. Because I have sisters and brothers all over the country, and it was okay to travel to see them, but now you don't travel as much.
Once the chance to travel again is more open and available, where would you like to go?
Well, I have decided that the month not to be in Florida is August because it's hot and it's humid. But I haven't figured out how to do that yet. But, well, I would like to go to Wisconsin and see my brother who lives there, or to Colorado. I have a sister living in Colorado, so I would like to go out there too. I used to drive, but I suppose now I would travel mostly by train or by airplane, and traveling that way.
Do you have a favorite Bible verse you would share?
A favorite Bible verse? Well, right now I'm reading. My custom is to read through one of the new translations as they come out, so I'm reading through the English Standard Version, the ESV, and I'm up to the Psalms at the moment. But my favorite verse, I suppose, is the one that says, all these things shall be added unto you. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And those are blessings as well as things.
Blessings, right, as well as the. I remember one of the students at Oral Bible College asked me one time, was it a sin to be rich? And I said, well, no, I don't think if God makes you rich, it's not a sin, but to want to be rich is a sin. I don't think he understood what I was trying to say to him at that time. So,
well, all of our riches are not necessarily gold and other things of the world.
Right.
They're definitely not, in my opinion.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
And thank you for tuning in, and we hope you'll tune in for another Front Porch Conversation.